The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Julia Vance stepped down onto Oklahoma Territory soil with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a heart beating so hard she thought it might burst right through her chest. It was 1889, late September, and the air in Tulsa carried the smell of dried grass and possibility. The land run had happened just months before, transforming this stretch of prairie into a collection of hastily built structures and ambitious dreams. Julia had traveled from Philadelphia with her aunt and uncle, part of a mail-order bride arrangement that had seemed like salvation when she had signed the papers 3 months ago. But yesterday, somewhere between Kansas and here, her aunt had taken ill with fever and passed during the night. Her uncle, grief-stricken and barely able to stand, had been left in a town 2 stops back with a doctor who promised to send word once he recovered or buried his wife. Julia had continued alone because there was nothing left to go back to. Philadelphia held only memories of her parents' deaths from influenza 2 years prior and creditors who had taken everything. The man she was supposed to marry, a merchant named Harold Brennan, was expecting a respectable woman with family connections and a modest dowry. Instead, he would get her, alone and penniless, with nothing to offer but the courage it took to keep moving forward. She smoothed her gray traveling dress, already showing the dirt of the journey, and picked up her small carpet bag. Inside were 2 changes of undergarments, a hairbrush, and her mother's Bible. That was the sum of her worldly possessions. The trading post door swung open, and a short man with thinning hair and a permanent frown stepped out. "You the Vance woman?" he asked, looking her up and down with obvious disappointment. "I am Julia Vance, yes," she said, keeping her voice steady even as her stomach twisted. "Are you Mr. Brennan?" "I am. Where is your trunk?" "The letters said you would arrive with your aunt and uncle." Julia met his eyes directly. "My aunt died yesterday. My uncle stayed behind with her body. My trunk was sold to pay for medicine that did not save her. I have what you see before you and nothing else." Harold Brennan's face turned an unflattering shade of purple. "Nothing? You come here with nothing?" "The arrangement was specific. I need a wife who can help establish my business, who brings respectability and connections." "What good are you to me?" People on the street were beginning to stare. Julia felt heat climb up her neck but refused to look away. "I can work, sir. I am educated. I can keep accounts, and I am stronger than I look." "Work?" Brennan laughed, a harsh sound. "I have 3 clerks who can work. I needed a wife with a dowry, someone to help me rise in this town's society. You are worthless to me. The deal is off." He turned and went back inside, slamming the door hard enough that the glass rattled. Julia stood frozen on the dusty street as the reality of her situation crashed over her. She was alone in a frontier town with no money, no family, and no prospects. The few coins in her pocket might buy her 1 meal. The sun was already past its zenith, and she had nowhere to sleep tonight. She became aware of the stairs again and forced herself to move, walking down the main street with her head up even though tears threatened. Tulsa was rough but growing, with false-fronted buildings lining the wide dirt road. A saloon, a general store, a livery, a hotel she could not afford, and at the end of the street, a small church with a white painted steeple. She was heading toward the church, thinking perhaps the minister might know of someone who needed help, when a commotion near the livery caught her attention. A horse, a beautiful roan mare, was rearing and plunging, scattering the men who had been trying to load supplies onto a pack saddle. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear, and foam flecked her bit. Without thinking, Julia dropped her bag and moved toward the horse. She had grown up around her grandfather's horses in the years before her parents moved to the city. The memory of his patient voice filled her mind as she approached slowly, making herself small and unthreatening. "Easy, girl," she said softly. "Easy now. Nobody is going to hurt you." "Madam, you should step back," a voice called out, but Julia ignored it. She could see the problem now. The cinch strap had been fastened too tight and twisted, pinching the mare's sensitive skin. That was why she was panicking. Julia kept talking, low and soothing, as she got closer. The mare's ears flicked toward her, and the wild plunging slowed to nervous sidesteps. Julia reached out slowly, letting the horse smell her hand, then gently touched her neck. The mare trembled but held still. "That is a good girl," Julia murmured. "Let me help you." She worked at the cinch with careful fingers, loosening the strap and straightening the twisted leather. The relief was immediate. The mare blew out a long breath and dropped her head, nuzzling Julia's shoulder. "Well, I will be," a deep voice said behind her. "She has not let anyone touch her all morning." Julia turned and found herself looking up at the tallest man she had ever seen. He was lean and sun-bronzed, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore work-worn denim and a dusty hat pushed back on his head. His face was angular and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He was looking at her with something like wonder. "The cinch was too tight and twisted," Julia explained. "It was pinching her." The man stepped closer and checked the mare's side where Julia indicated. A red mark marred the horse's coat. His jaw tightened. "I told those boys to be careful. This is the third time they have caused problems." He looked back at Julia. "Thank you. She is valuable to me and I would not want her hurt." He paused. "You have a good hand with horses." "My grandfather raised them," Julia said. "I spent summers at his farm as a child." The man nodded slowly, still studying her with those remarkable blue eyes. "I am Ryder Ashford. I run a ranch about 10 miles west of here. This mare is part of my breeding stock. Julia Vance." She offered her hand without thinking, then felt foolish because ladies did not shake hands with strange men. But Ryder took it without hesitation, his palm calloused and warm. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Vance." He had not let go of her hand yet, and Julia felt an odd flutter in her chest. "Are you new to Tulsa? I have not seen you before." "I arrived on the stage about 20 minutes ago," Julia admitted. The exhaustion and shock of the day suddenly hit her and she swayed slightly. Ryder's grip on her hand tightened, steadying her. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I am fine," Julia said automatically, but her voice wavered. She tried to pull her hand back, but Ryder held on gently. "No, you are not fine," he said. His voice was kind but firm. "When did you last eat?" Julia could not remember. Yesterday sometime, before her aunt had taken the final turn. "I am well," she said again, less convincingly. "There is a cafe 2 buildings down," Ryder said, making a decision. "You will join me for a late lunch, and you can tell me what has you standing in the middle of Tulsa looking like you have just lost your last friend in the world." "I could not possibly," Julia protested weakly, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly enough that they both heard it. Color flooded her cheeks. "That settles it," Ryder said. He had a half-smile now, and it transformed his serious face into something that made Julia's heart skip. "Give me 5 minutes to deal with these incompetent stable hands, and then we eat." He was back in 3 minutes, having apparently made his displeasure known in very clear terms. Julia retrieved her carpetbag, and they walked together toward the cafe, a small establishment with gingham curtains in the window. The owner, a round woman with kind eyes, showed them to a table and brought coffee without being asked. "Stew and cornbread," Ryder told her. 2 bowls. As soon as the woman left, he turned his attention back to Julia. "Now tell me what happened." Julia had not intended to tell him anything, but there was something about Ryder Ashford that made the words spill out. She told him about Philadelphia, about her parents' deaths and the debts, about the mail-order bride arrangement that had been her only escape. She told him about her aunt's death and her uncle's grief, about arriving alone and penniless. She even told him about Harold Brennan's rejection, though the humiliation of it still burned through it all. Ryder listened without interrupting. His face grew harder as she talked about Brennan, his jaw clenching. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "So you have nowhere to go," he said finally. It was not a question. "I was going to ask at the church if anyone needed help," Julia admitted. "I can cook and clean. I am good with figures. Surely someone needs something." The stew arrived and Ryder waited until the owner left before speaking again. "I need something." Julia looked up from her bowl, spoon halfway to her mouth. "I need a wife," Ryder said bluntly. "My ranch is profitable, but it is too much for one man to manage alone. I need someone who can keep the house, help with the accounts, and handle things when I am out with the cattle or horses. I had a housekeeper, but she left 3 months ago to live with her daughter in Texas. I have been managing, but it is not sustainable." Julia stared at him. "You cannot be serious. You do not know me. We met 20 minutes ago." "I know enough," Ryder said calmly. "I know you have courage because you came all this way alone. I know you are honest because you told Brennan the truth instead of trying to deceive him. I know you are kind because your first thought when you saw a frightened animal was to help it. I know you are educated and capable. That is more than most marriages start with." "But you do not love me," Julia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I do not love you." "No," Ryder agreed. "But love is not always how things start. My parents barely knew each other when they married. They grew to love each other over 30 years together. My mother told me once that respect and kindness are better foundations than passion." Julia's mind was racing. This was insane. And yet, what choice did she have? She could try to find work in town, but single women had few options, and most of them were not respectable. She could try to contact her uncle, but he was in no position to help her even if he recovered from his grief. This man, this stranger, was offering her security and a home. It was more than she had any right to expect. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you make such an offer to someone you just met?" Ryder took a sip of his coffee, considering his answer. "Because I have been looking for a wife for 2 years without success. The available women in this territory are spoken for or unsuitable. I could send for a mail-order bride like Brennan did, but that takes months and I need help now. You need a home and security. It is practical for both of us." He paused. "And because when you were helping that mare I saw something in you, gentleness and strength together. That is rare." Julia's throat felt tight. No one had seen anything worthwhile in her for a very long time. She looked down at her hands, rough and reddened from the journey. "I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No dowry, no trousseau, just what you see." "You came here with nothing but courage," Ryder said, and his voice was soft now. "That is all I will ever need from you." The words hung in the air between them. Julia felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She met Ryder's gaze and saw only honesty there. This was a business arrangement, but it was being offered with respect and kindness. That was more than she had hoped for when she stepped off the stage. "I will not share your bed right away," she said, needing to make that clear. "If we do this, I need time to know you first." "That is fair," Ryder said without hesitation. "The ranch house has 2 bedrooms. You will have your own space until you are comfortable otherwise." Julia took a deep breath. "Then yes, I will marry you." Ryder's face broke into a full smile and Julia's stomach flipped over. "Finish your stew," he said. "Then we will go find the minister. I want to get back to the ranch before dark." They were married an hour later in the small white church at the end of the street. The minister, a gentle old man named Reverend Pierce, asked if they were certain, given how quickly this was happening. Ryder said he had never been more certain of anything. Julia, her voice shaking only slightly, agreed. There were no witnesses except the minister's wife, who played the piano and smiled tearfully through the brief ceremony. Ryder had no ring to give her, but he held her hand and spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice. When it was Julia's turn, she looked into his blue eyes and promised to honor and cherish this man she had known for less than 2 hours. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Pierce said, and Julia's heart hammered. But Ryder only pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, his hand gentle on her cheek for just a moment. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Ashford," he said softly, and Julia felt something shift inside her. She was married. She had a new name and a new home. The terror that had gripped her since her aunt's death loosened its hold just slightly. Ryder had to conduct his business in town, which took another hour. Julia waited with the horses, stroking the roan mare's neck and trying to process what she had just done. She had married a complete stranger. It was reckless and desperate and possibly the bravest thing she had ever done. When Ryder returned, he had packages tied to both horses. "Supplies," he explained, "and I got you these." He handed her a bundle that contained a split riding skirt, a simple blouse, and a warm coat. "Those city clothes will not hold up to ranch life. The general store owner helped me guess your size." Julia fingered the soft fabric of the coat, overwhelmed. "Thank you. You did not have to do this." "You are my wife now," Ryder said simply. "Taking care of you is my job." They mounted up, Julia on the roan mare, who accepted her immediately, and Ryder on a sturdy buckskin gelding. As they rode out of Tulsa, Julia looked back once at the town where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. Then she turned her face west, toward the setting sun and whatever waited for her at Ryder Ashford's ranch. The ride took 2 hours through rolling grassland dotted with blackjack oak and prairie flowers gone to seed. Ryder pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the land. He had claimed his 160 acres during the land run, built his house and barn with his own hands, and spent the past 5 months building a herd and breaking horses to sell. "It is not much yet," he said as they crested a rise and the ranch came into view. "But it will be." Julia caught her breath. The house was small, built of rough-hewn lumber, but it was sturdy and well-made. A barn stood nearby, larger than the house, and a corral held several horses. A well with a pump stood in the yard, and there was even a small garden patch, though it was mostly gone to weeds now. "It is beautiful," Julia said honestly. After the cramped boarding house rooms in Philadelphia and the terrifying uncertainty of the past days, this looked like paradise. Ryder's face relaxed into a smile. "Wait until you see inside before you say that." The interior was dim and dusty. One large room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 doors led to the bedrooms. The furniture was simple but well crafted, and everything was coated in the fine dust of neglect. "I am not much of a housekeeper," Ryder admitted, looking embarrassed. "I have been focused on the outside work." "It just needs a good cleaning," Julia said. Her hands were already itching to start. This, at least, she knew how to do. "Show me where things are and I will have it comfortable in no time." Ryder showed her around, pointing out the root cellar stocked with basics, the loft where he stored grain, the water pump that worked well. He carried her carpet bag into the smaller bedroom, which held a bed frame with a rope mattress, a small dresser, and a washstand. "I will bring in straw for the mattress tomorrow," he said. "For tonight, you can use my room." The mattress is in better shape. I will sleep on the floor out here." "I could not ask you to do that," Julia protested. "You are not asking, I am offering." His tone left no room for argument. "You have had a long day, Julia. Let me do this much." They ate a simple supper of beans and salt pork that Ryder cooked over the fire. He apologized for the poor quality, but Julia had eaten nothing but stew all day and was grateful for anything. As they ate, they talked carefully, learning about each other. Ryder was 26, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had a ranch in Texas, but he wanted to make his own way. He had come to Oklahoma Territory with the land run and claimed this piece of land after a hard ride and harder fight. Julia told him more about her childhood, about the summers at her grandfather's farm and the years in Philadelphia. She found herself relaxing as they talked. Ryder was easy to talk to, his voice low and calm, his questions thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke, and Julia appreciated that. She had been around men who liked the sound of their own voice too much. Ryder was different. After supper, Julia washed the dishes while Ryder tended to the horses. When he came back inside, she was standing at the window, looking out at the darkness. The prairie night was alive with sounds she did not recognize, and the sky was thick with stars. "It is so different from the city," she said softly. "Everything is bigger here. The sky, the land, the silence. It feels like you could see forever." Ryder came to stand beside her. "Does it frighten you?" "A little," Julia admitted. "But mostly it feels like hope. Like there is room to breathe for the first time in years." She felt Ryder's gaze on her face. "I am glad," he said quietly. "This is a good place for new beginnings." That night, Julia lay in Ryder's bed, which smelled faintly of leather and sage, and marveled at how much her life had changed in a single day. She had woken up that morning as an orphaned, penniless mail-order bride with no prospects. She was going to sleep as Mrs. Ryder Ashford, with a home and a husband and the vast Oklahoma prairie spread out around her like a promise. She heard Ryder moving around in the main room, settling down for the night. He had given her privacy without question, had been nothing but respectful and kind. The marriage was not what she had imagined for herself as a girl, but then, nothing in her life had turned out as she had imagined. Maybe this strange arrangement would work. Maybe they could build something good together. The next morning, Julia woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly in her travel dress, since her new clothes were still packed, and emerged to find Ryder already up and dressed, breakfast cooking on the fire. "Good morning," he said, and his smile was warm. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Julia admitted. It was true. Despite the strangeness of everything, she had slept deeply and without dreams. After breakfast, Ryder showed her the day's work. He needed to check the fences in the north pasture and work with a young stallion he was training. Julia could do as she pleased, he said, but if she wanted to settle in and clean, the supplies were all there. "Or you could ride out with me," he added, "if you wanted to learn the land." Julia wanted to start making the house into a home, but she also wanted to see the ranch, to understand what Ryder was building here. "Could I do both? Come with you this morning and work on the house this afternoon." Ryder's face lit up. "I would like that." They rode out together, and Ryder showed her the boundaries of his land, the creek that ran through the eastern edge, the meadow where the grass grew tallest. He talked about his plans to build the herd, to breed horses that could handle the Oklahoma weather and terrain. His voice was animated when he talked about his dreams, and Julia found herself caught up in his enthusiasm. The young stallion Ryder was training was a beautiful bay with a white star on his forehead. He was skittish and nervous, shying away when Ryder approached with the halter. Julia watched from the fence rail as Ryder worked, his movements patient and calm, his voice low and soothing. It was the same approach she had used with the roan mare yesterday, and she realized they shared this understanding of horses. After an hour, the stallion was allowing Ryder to touch him, though he still danced nervously. Ryder called it a day and turned the horse loose. "Progress," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That is all you can ask for." They rode back to the house, and Ryder left her to work inside while he tackled chores in the barn. Julia changed into the split skirt and blouse he had bought her and tied her hair back with a scrap of cloth. Then she started cleaning. It took all afternoon and most of the evening. She swept and scrubbed, washed windows and shook out rugs. She found linens in a trunk and made up the bed in her room with fresh straw from the barn and clean sheets that smelled of sunshine after being hung on the line. She organized the kitchen area, scrubbed the table and chairs, and polished the 2 oil lamps until they gleamed. When Ryder came in at dusk, he stopped in the doorway and stared. The house was transformed. The windows caught the last light of day, the floor was clean, and something that smelled wonderful was cooking over the fire. "What did you make?" he asked, looking almost dazed. "Stew from the salt pork and some vegetables from the root cellar," Julia said. "And I found flour and made biscuits." "I hope that is all right. I did not ask first." "All right," Ryder shook his head. "Julia, this is amazing. I have not had a proper meal in months." They ate together, and Julia felt a warm glow at Ryder's obvious pleasure in the food. It was simple fare, nothing fancy, but she had made it with care. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Ryder told her stories about growing up in Texas, about his brothers and their constant competitions, about his mother who could outride any of her sons. "She sounds wonderful," Julia said wistfully. "She would have liked you," Ryder said. "She always said the best people were the ones who faced life head-on instead of waiting for it to come to them." He looked at her thoughtfully. "That is what you did. When Brennan rejected you, you did not fall apart. You kept moving forward." "I did not have much choice," Julia said. "Everyone has a choice," Ryder countered. "You chose courage. That is worth something." The days began to fall into a rhythm. Ryder was up before dawn, tending to the animals and working on the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Julia managed the house, cooked meals, and slowly began to make the place into a home. She washed clothes in the creek, hanging them to dry on a line Ryder strung between 2 trees. She weeded the garden patch and planted some late-season vegetables, hoping they would mature before frost. She learned to make bread from the sourdough starter she found in a crock in the root cellar. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk. Julia found herself looking forward to these quiet hours more than anything else in her day. Ryder was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter. He asked about her opinions and actually listened to her answers. He treated her like an equal, something Julia had not experienced with any man before. At the end of the first week, Ryder asked if she wanted to help him with the horses. "You have a gift with them," he said, "and I could use an extra pair of hands." Julia agreed eagerly. Working with the horses gave her joy she had not felt in years. The young bay stallion, whom Ryder had named Thunder, began to respond to her touch. Within days, he was following her around the corral like a puppy, nuzzling her pockets for the treats she always carried. "He likes you better than me," Ryder said, but he was grinning. "I spent weeks trying to get him to trust me, and you won him over in 3 days." "I think he is just hungry," Julia said, feeding Thunder an apple slice, but she was pleased. 2 weeks after their marriage, a storm rolled across the prairie. Julia had never experienced a storm like it. The sky turned green, then black, and the wind howled like a living thing. Ryder rushed them into the house and barred the door, then pushed the heavy table against the wall. "Get under there," he ordered, and Julia scrambled under the table, her heart pounding. Ryder crowded in beside her, his body shielding hers as the storm hit. The wind screamed and the house shook. Something crashed against the wall and Julia flinched. Ryder's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close. "It is all right," he said, his voice steady even though she could feel his heart racing against her side. "The house is solid. We are safe." They huddled together as the storm raged. Julia's face was pressed against Ryder's chest, and she could smell the scent of him, soap and leather and something uniquely his own. His arm was strong around her, his presence comforting. When lightning flashed close enough to shake the windows, she pressed closer, and Ryder's hold tightened. "I have got you," he murmured. "I will keep you safe." The storm passed after an hour, but they stayed under the table for a while longer, until the sound of rain gentled into a steady patter. When they finally crawled out, Julia was acutely aware that something had shifted between them. The touch had been innocent, born of necessity, but it had awakened something neither of them could name. Ryder cleared his throat. "I should check on the animals," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I will come with you," Julia said. They found that the barn had lost some shingles, and a tree had come down near the corral, but the animals were unharmed. They worked together to make temporary repairs, and by the time they went back inside, they had settled into their familiar, comfortable rhythm. But that night, as Julia lay in her bed, she found herself thinking about the feel of Ryder's arm around her, the solid warmth of him, the way her heart had felt like it might burst when he promised to keep her safe. These were not the thoughts of a wife in a marriage of convenience. These were the thoughts of a woman beginning to fall in love. The realization terrified her. This was supposed to be practical, a business arrangement. But Ryder was not a business partner. He was kind and patient and strong. He made her laugh. He valued her opinions. He had taken her in when she had nothing and treated her with respect and care. How could she not feel something for him? She did not know if he felt the same way. He was always proper, always respectful of the boundaries she had set. He had never tried to kiss her or touch her beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing something at dinner. She thought sometimes she caught him looking at her with something warm in his eyes, but she could never be sure. October arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color to the scrubby oaks. A neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who lived 5 miles east, came to visit. She was a weathered woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a kind heart. "Heard Ryder got himself a wife," she said bluntly, looking Julia up and down. "Pleased to meet you, girl. I was starting to think that boy would work himself into an early grave without someone to look after him." "He does work hard," Julia agreed, serving coffee and the ginger cookies she had made that morning. "Too hard," Mrs. Patterson said, "but that is the way of young men trying to prove themselves." She bit into a cookie and made an appreciative sound. "These are good. You can cook then." "Yes, madam. And you are handy around the place. You have that look about you like you are not afraid of hard work." Julia felt like she was being evaluated but did not mind. "I do my best." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "You will do fine here. Ryder is a good man. His father raised him right." She leaned forward. "But tell me true, girl, are you happy? This was fast the way I heard it. You met and married the same day." Julia considered the question carefully. "I am happy," she said finally. "Ryder has been kind to me. This is a good life." "But," Mrs. Patterson prompted. "But nothing," Julia said. "I have nothing to complain about." "That is not the same as being happy," Mrs. Patterson said shrewdly. "But give it time. Real marriage is not built in a day or even a month. It is built in the small moments, the everyday kindnesses. If you have those, the rest will follow." After Mrs. Patterson left, Julia thought about her words. The everyday kindnesses. That was what she and Ryder had, was it not? He brought her wildflowers he found on his rides. She made his favorite meals. He fixed the loose board on her bedroom floor that creaked. She mended his shirts. These were small things, but they added up to something larger. That evening, Ryder came in from the barn looking frustrated. "That fence in the south pasture is down," he said. "A tree fell on it during the storm, and I did not notice until today. I need to fix it before the cattle wander off, but it is a two-person job. I will have to ride over to the Patterson place tomorrow and ask to borrow her hired man." "I could help you," Julia offered. Ryder looked skeptical. "It is heavy work, Julia." "I am stronger than I look," Julia said, echoing the words she had said to Harold Brennan what felt like a lifetime ago. "Let me try. If I cannot manage it, then you can go get help." Ryder studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we will try it tomorrow." The fence repair was indeed hard work. The tree had crushed a whole section of posts, and they had to clear the debris, dig new post holes, and set the rails. Julia's hands blistered and her back ached, but she kept working. Ryder tried several times to suggest she go back to the house, but Julia refused. She had said she would help and she would not back down. By sunset, the fence was repaired. Julia's hands were bleeding despite the gloves Ryder had found for her, and she was fairly certain she would not be able to move in the morning. But the fence was solid, and the cattle were secure. "You did it," Ryder said, wiping sweat from his face. He looked at her with open admiration. "I honestly did not think we could manage it without another man's help, but you kept pace with me all day." "I told you I was strong," Julia said. Her voice came out more breathless than she intended. Ryder laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "You certainly did." He reached out and gently took one of her hands, examining the blisters. His touch was careful, his fingers warm against hers. "These need tending. Come on." At the house, he made her sit while he fetched a basin of cool water and clean cloths. He knelt in front of her and washed her hands gently, cleaning the dirt and blood from the broken blisters. Julia watched his bent head, the way his dark hair fell forward, the concentration on his face as he tended to her injuries. "I should have made you go back," he said softly. "This is my fault." "It is not," Julia protested. "I wanted to help. I am not fragile, Ryder." "No," he agreed, looking up at her. "You are not. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met." His blue eyes held hers, and Julia felt her breath catch. "Julia, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "This is not what I expected," Ryder said slowly. He was still holding her hand, his thumb brushing over her wrist. "When I married you, I thought we would have a practical partnership, a good working relationship. I thought that would be enough." He paused. "But it is not enough anymore, not for me." Julia's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere in the last month I have fallen in love with you," Ryder said. His voice was rough with emotion. "I love the way you sing while you work. I love how you are gentle with the horses and fierce when you are fighting with fence posts. I love your courage and your kindness. I love sitting with you in the evenings and listening to you talk. I love everything about you." He took a breath. "I am not asking you to feel the same way. I know that is not what you signed up for, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest with you." Julia felt tears spring to her eyes. "Ryder," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "Nothing has to change. I will still respect your space and your boundaries. I just could not keep pretending that this was only a business arrangement for me anymore." "Ryder," Julia said again, more firmly this time. "Stop talking and listen to me." He looked up at her, hope and fear warring in his expression. "I fell in love with you weeks ago," Julia said. "I think it started that first day when you told me that my courage was all you needed. I think it grew every time you made me laugh, every time you listened to me like what I said mattered. I love you too. I have been terrified to say it because I thought you only wanted a practical partnership." For a moment, Ryder just stared at her. Then he surged to his feet, cupping her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Please," Julia breathed. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever whispered. His lips were gentle at first, then more insistent as Julia's arms came around his neck, pulling him closer. She had been kissed before, chased kisses from the boy who courted her when she was 16, but this was different. This was fire and sweetness and coming home all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again. "God, Julia, I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered. They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing and making plans. Julia agreed to move into Ryder's bedroom, to truly become his wife in every sense. But not tonight, they decided. Tonight was for the declaration, for the joy of knowing their feelings were returned. The rest would come in its own time. When Julia finally went to bed in her own room one last time, she lay awake for a long time, thinking about how much had changed. A month ago, she had stepped off a stage in Tulsa with nothing but courage and desperation. Now she had a home, a husband who loved her, and a future that stretched out bright and full of promise. The next night, Julia moved into Ryder's room. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she brushed out her hair and changed into the simple white nightgown she had brought from Philadelphia. But when she opened the door and saw Ryder waiting for her, all the nervousness melted away. This was her husband, the man she loved, and there was nothing to fear. Ryder was gentle and patient, guiding her through the intimate dance of marriage with care and love. He whispered words of love and praise against her skin, making her feel cherished and beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, and Julia felt complete for the first time in her life. No regrets. Ryder asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "None," Julia said. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Julia's life. She and Ryder worked side by side during the day, building the ranch and tending the animals. At night, they explored the depths of their love, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal care. They talked for hours about their dreams and plans. Ryder wanted to expand the herd and build a reputation for quality horses. Julia wanted to start a proper vegetable garden in the spring and maybe get some chickens. November brought the first frost, and with it, news from town. Mrs. Patterson stopped by with supplies and gossip. Harold Brennan, it seemed, had finally found a mail-order bride willing to overlook his poor manners. The wedding was set for December. "Good riddance," Ryder said when he heard the news. "I saw him in town last week and told him what I thought of any man who would treat a woman the way he treated you." "You did not," Julia said, half horrified and half pleased. "I certainly did," Ryder said. "The man is a fool. He had the chance to marry you and threw it away." "That is not something I can forgive easily." Julia kissed him. "My fierce protector." "Always," Ryder promised. December arrived with snow, and the ranch took on a hushed, magical quality. Julia and Ryder worked together to ensure the animals had shelter and food for the winter. They spent long evenings by the fire, Ryder reading aloud from the few books they owned while Julia knitted socks and scarves from wool she had traded for with Mrs. Patterson. On Christmas Eve, Ryder presented Julia with a gift wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a pen. "I thought you might want to write down your story," he said. "Everything you have been through, everything we are building together. It is worth remembering." Julia was so moved she could barely speak. "Thank you," she managed. "But I did not get you anything." You gave me everything, Ryder said simply. A home, a partner, love. That is more than I ever hoped for. Julia kissed him deeply, trying to put all her love into the gesture. I have something to tell you, she said when they pulled apart. I was not sure at first, and I wanted to be certain before I said anything. What is it? I am with child, Julia said, her voice full of wonder. We are going to have a baby. Ryder's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, joy, fear, and then pure elation. He let out a whoop that probably scared the horses and swept Julia into his arms, spinning her around. Careful, she protested, laughing. Put me down. A baby, Ryder said, setting her down but not letting go. His hands cradled her face. Julia, we are going to have a baby. Are you happy? She asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it, Ryder said. He knelt down and pressed a kiss to her still flat belly. Hello in there, little one. I am your father, and I already love you more than I knew was possible. Julia ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Both of you. The winter passed slowly, but Julia did not mind. She was warm and safe and loved. Her body changed as the baby grew, and Ryder was attentive to her every need. He insisted she rest more, though Julia still did her fair share of work. He talked to her belly every night, telling the baby stories about the ranch and making promises about the life they would build together. In late winter, Julia received a letter. It was from her uncle, writing from Kansas. His wife had been buried there, and he had recovered from his grief enough to want to make contact. He apologized for leaving her alone, for not being strong enough to continue with her. He had heard she was married and hoped she was well. Julia wrote back immediately, telling him about Ryder and the ranch and the baby coming in the summer. She assured him she held no ill will and invited him to visit if he ever found himself in Oklahoma territory. You think he will come? Ryder asked when she showed him the letter. I do not know, Julia admitted, but I hope so. He is the only family I have left. He is welcome here, Ryder said. Any family of yours is family of mine. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the prairie, and Julia was heavily pregnant. She could no longer help with the outside work, which frustrated her, but Ryder was adamant. You are carrying our child, he said. That is work enough. Mrs. Patterson came to stay the last 2 weeks before the baby was due, much to Julia's relief. She had been nervous about giving birth with only Ryder to help. Mrs. Patterson had delivered dozens of babies and was calm and capable. On a warm night in June, Julia's pains began. Ryder was terrified, pacing the small house like a caged animal while Mrs. Patterson and Julia worked through the labor. It was long and hard, and there were moments when Julia thought she could not continue. But then she would hear Ryder's voice from the next room, calling encouragement, and she found the strength to keep going. Just after dawn, their son was born. He was small and perfect, with dark hair like his father and lungs that announced his arrival to the entire prairie. Mrs. Patterson cleaned the baby and handed him to Julia, who looked down at the tiny face with awe. Hello, little one, she whispered. We have been waiting for you. Ryder burst into the room, ignoring Mrs. Patterson's protest that he should wait. He knelt beside the bed, staring at his wife and son with tears streaming down his face. A boy, he said hoarsely. Julia, we have a son. Meet Robert, Julia said, using the name they had chosen. Robert James Ashford. Robert, Ryder repeated. He carefully took the baby from Julia, cradling him like he was made of glass. Welcome to the world, son. I am your father, and I promise I will do everything in my power to give you a good life. Julia watched her husband hold their son and felt her heart expand until it felt like it might burst. This was her family. This was her home. A year ago, she had arrived in Oklahoma Territory with nothing but courage. Now she had everything that mattered. The first months with Robert were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby, quick to smile and curious about everything. Ryder was besotted, spending every free moment playing with his son. Julia watched them together and marveled at the depths of Ryder's love. In late summer, Julia's uncle arrived for a visit. He was thinner than she remembered, worn down by grief, but his eyes lit up when he saw Robert. He stayed for 2 weeks, helping with the ranch work and slowly coming back to life. When he left, he promised to return in the spring. "This is a good place," he told Julia as they said goodbye. "You have built something beautiful here." "We have," Julia agreed, looking at Ryder, who stood with Robert in his arms. "We really have." The years that followed were full of hard work, joy, and growth. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Ryder's horses gained a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far away as Texas to purchase his stock. Julia's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and seeds to trade with neighbors. They added chickens, then pigs, then a milk cow. When Robert was 2, Julia gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had Julia's dark eyes and Ryder's easy smile. 2 years later, another son arrived, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings but just as beloved. The house had to be expanded twice to accommodate the growing family. Ryder built an addition with help from neighbors, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. Julia hung curtains she had sewn herself and filled the shelves with books they ordered from catalogs. Mrs. Patterson remained a close friend, visiting often and helping when the children were sick or Julia needed an extra pair of hands. Julia's uncle moved to Tulsa permanently, opening a small shop and visiting the ranch monthly. He became Grandpa William to the children, who adored him. The town of Tulsa grew and changed around them. More settlers arrived, businesses opened, and the rough edges of the frontier slowly smoothed into something more civilized. But the ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work and love and family. On their 10th anniversary, Ryder took Julia out to the creek where they had first ridden together. The children were spending the day with Mrs. Patterson, giving them rare time alone. 10 years, Ryder said, holding her hand as they sat on the creek bank. "Can you believe it?" "Some days, no," Julia admitted. "It feels like yesterday that I stepped off the stage in Tulsa. Other days, it feels like I have always been here." "Do you ever regret it?" Ryder asked. "Saying yes to a stranger, binding yourself to this life?" Julia turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world. His face had weathered over the years, lines deepening around his eyes and mouth, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. More than that, he was good and kind and strong. He was her partner in every sense of the word. "Never," she said firmly. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life, this family we have built, is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed possible." Ryder pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown from the beginning. "I love you, Julia Ashford, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. They sat together by the creek until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Then they rode back to the ranch, to their children and their home and the life they had built together from nothing but courage and love. Julia sometimes thought about that terrified girl who had stood in the dusty street in Tulsa, rejected and alone. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that the best parts of her life were just beginning. But perhaps the not knowing had been necessary. Perhaps she needed to walk through the fear to appreciate the beauty on the other side. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of the children. Robert grew tall and serious, with his father's way with horses. Sarah was quick and bright, always reading or asking questions. Michael was gentle and thoughtful, content to help his mother in the garden or spend hours watching the prairie animals. When Robert was 16, he asked if he could start his own small herd, a branch of the family business. Ryder agreed, proud of his son's initiative. They worked together to section off a portion of land for Robert's use, and Julia watched her husband teach their son the same patience and care he had shown her all those years ago. Sarah declared she wanted to be a teacher, much to Julia's delight. Ryder arranged for her to attend school in Tulsa, boarding with a respectable family during the week and coming home on weekends. It was hard to let her go, but Julia was proud of her daughter's ambition and intelligence. Michael remained at home, happy to work the ranch alongside his father and brother. He had a gift for gentling difficult animals and a quiet strength that reminded Julia of Ryder. Julia's uncle passed peacefully in his sleep when Robert was 18. They buried him in the small cemetery outside Tulsa, and the whole family mourned the loss. But they celebrated his life too, grateful for the years they had shared and the role he had played in their family. On the day of the funeral, Robert told them he had been courting a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owner. Her name was Emma, and he wanted to marry her. Julia and Ryder gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the ranch the following spring. Emma was a sweet girl with a practical nature, and she fit into the family easily. Within a year, she gave Julia and Ryder their first grandchild, a little girl they named Julia Rose. Holding her namesake in her arms, Julia felt the circle of life completing itself. Sarah finished her schooling and returned to Tulsa to teach at the new school that had been built. She married a banker named Thomas, a steady man who adored her. Michael married a rancher's daughter from the next county, and they built a house on the western edge of the property. The ranch that had started with just Ryder and 160 acres of raw land now stretched over 500 acres, worked by 3 generations of Ashfords. The original small house had been expanded and renovated multiple times, but Julia and Ryder still slept in the same bedroom where they had first come together as husband and wife. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. There were children running everywhere, grandchildren whose names Julia sometimes mixed up in her exhaustion. But the chaos was wonderful, a testament to what she and Ryder had built. That night, after everyone had gone to bed or headed back to their own homes, Julia and Ryder sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The prairie stretched out before them, dark and vast under the stars. "You remember the day we met?" Julia asked, her head resting on Ryder's shoulder. "Every detail," Ryder said. "You were wearing a gray dress and looked like you wanted to disappear into the ground. Then you walked up to that terrified horse like you had nothing to fear." "I was terrified," Julia admitted, "of everything. The land, the future, you. And now I am home," Julia said simply. "This is where I belong with you." Ryder kissed the top of her head. "You came here with nothing but courage, and you built a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You are the bravest person I have ever known." "We built it together," Julia corrected. "Everything we have is because we worked as partners, because we loved each other enough to weather the hard times." And there were hard times, Ryder acknowledged. They had lost a baby between Sarah and Michael, a daughter who had been stillborn. They had struggled through droughts and harsh winters. They had faced disease, injury, and the constant challenges of ranch life. But they had faced everything together, and that had made all the difference. "The good outweighs the hard," Julia said, "by so much." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Julia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Philadelphia to that dusty street in Tulsa to this porch, to this man, to this life. She thought about all the what-ifs that might have been. What if her parents had not died? What if she had not become a mail-order bride? What if Harold Brennan had accepted her instead of rejecting her? What if she had never met Ryder? But those what-ifs did not matter because this was the life she had lived. This was the love she had found. And it was more than enough. It was everything. As the years continued to pass, Julia and Ryder aged gracefully together. Their hair went gray, their bodies slowed, but their love remained constant. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Robert's management, with Michael's steady support. Sarah's children brought books and new ideas each time they visited, keeping Julia's mind sharp. The house was always full of noise and love and the chaos of a large extended family. Julia kept a garden until she was 70, though she needed help with the heavier work. She still cooked Sunday dinners for anyone who could make it, though Emma and her daughters-in-law insisted on helping. Ryder, though his back ached and his hands were gnarled with arthritis, still worked with the horses. It was slower now, gentler, but the passion remained. On a warm summer evening when Julia was 73 and Ryder was 75, they sat together on the porch as the sun set. Robert and Emma were visiting with their youngest, and laughter drifted from inside the house. Julia held Ryder's hand, their fingers intertwined as they had been for decades. "I have been thinking," Ryder said quietly. "About what?" "About that day in Tulsa. About how I told you that your courage was all I needed from you." Julia smiled. "I remember. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me." "I was wrong," Ryder said, and Julia looked at him in surprise. "You gave me so much more than courage. You gave me a home. You gave me children and grandchildren. You gave me laughter and companionship and love that has sustained me through every day of the past 35 years. You gave me everything that matters." Tears filled Julia's eyes. "You gave me all those things too. You gave me a life when I had nothing. You saw value in me when I could not see it in myself. You loved me with a constancy I never knew was possible." "I would do it all again," Ryder said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time." "And I would choose you," Julia whispered. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, two old people who had loved each other through decades of life. When they pulled apart, Julia rested her head on Ryder's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Inside the house, their family laughed and talked, secure in the foundation that Julia and Ryder had built. Outside, the prairie whispered its ancient song, the same song it had sung when Julia first arrived with nothing but courage. As darkness fell and stars emerged one by one, Julia closed her eyes and smiled. She had lived a good life, full of love and purpose. She had taken a leap of faith on a dusty street in Tulsa and found more than she ever imagined possible. She had found home. She had found love. She had found everything. And it all started because a cowboy looked at a frightened woman and saw her courage, and because that woman looked at a stranger and chose to trust. That was enough to build a life on. That was enough to build a legacy on. That was enough for everything. The stars continued their slow dance across the night sky as Julia and Ryder sat together, surrounded by the life they had created from nothing but courage, kindness, and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did. But tonight was perfect, complete unto itself, a moment of peace and contentment. Julia opened her eyes one more time, looking out at the land that had become hers, at the house that held her family, at the man beside her who had been her partner through it all. She squeezed his hand gently. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Ryder replied. "Always have, always will." And there, on that porch in Oklahoma Territory, under the vast prairie sky, that was all that needed to be said. The story that had begun with desperate courage and impulsive decisions had become a love story for the ages, passed down through generations of Ashfords as a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances. Julia Vance Ashford had stepped off a stage with nothing but courage, and Ryder Ashford had told her that was all he needed. But together, they had built so much more. They had built a family, a legacy, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. And that was the perfect ending to their story, the only ending that mattered. Not dramatic or filled with grand gestures, but quiet and true and complete. A life well lived, a love well earned, and a family that would carry their story forward into the future. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and home. Inside, someone started playing the piano that Sarah had insisted they buy years ago. The familiar notes of an old hymn drifted out, and Julia hummed along softly. This was peace. This was joy. This was everything that mattered in the world, distilled down to its purest essence. Two people who had chosen each other, who had worked together, who had loved each other through all the seasons of life. As the stars wheeled overhead and the music played on, Julia and Ryder sat together in perfect contentment, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place, to each other, to home. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal. And somewhere, in the heart of the Oklahoma prairie, in the legacy of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, their courage and love would live on forever. A testament to what two people could build when they chose each other, every single day. The end of their journey was also its fulfillment. Proof that sometimes the best adventures start with nothing but courage and a willingness to take a chance on love.